Our second video in general embryology. In this video, we will discuss chapter 2, female sex organs. As we discussed in the previous video with male sex organs, we are dividing the female sex organs into primary sex organs, which are formed of the ovary, and secondary sex organs, which are the female genital duct system. And the female genital duct system is composed of the uterine tube or fallopian tube, uterus, and vagina, together with the accessory glands. Here, the role of accessory glands in female sex organs is so limited in comparison to the accessory glands in male sex organs. Because of the ovulated ovum, when it is liberated from the ovary during the ovulation, it already contains all the material required for its nourishment during the period waiting for fertilization. If this is in case of if we need to compare between the major differences between male and female sex organs. So accessory glands in male sex organs play a very important role in the formation of seminal fluid, while the action of accessory glands in female sex organs are so limited. And again, as we discussed before, is the external genitalia, which is known as vulva, and the vulva is composed of clitoris, labia majora, and labia minora. Okay, so what about the primary female sex organ, which is the ovary? I think also in the previous video, we defined word primary and what is the aim from word primary here, as primary sex organs are the organs essential for the process of pregnancy. So ovary, we have two ovaries, one on each side of the pelvis, and inshallah we will explain the site of the ovaries in the pelvis in chapter pelvis later on, inshallah. And as we discussed in tests, ovaries also have a non-hormonal function and hormonal function. The hormonal function for the ovaries is the production of ovum, while the hormonal function of the ovaries is to secrete the female sex hormones. This point is to be compared with that of the tests. Regarding the position, ovaries present in the true pelvis in a fossa. This fossa is known as ovarian fossa on each side of the lateral wall of the true pelvis. And inshallah, we will discuss the ovarian fossa and the true pelvis in chapter of pelvis. So one of the major differences between male and female sex hormones, between male and female sex organs, is that testes is an abdominal organ that lies outside the abdominal cavity. But the ovaries are still inside the pelvis, not outside the abdominal cavity, because of one of the factors affecting the process of spermatogenesis is the temperature. This is why the tests are essential to be outside the abdominal cavity in order to maintain the optimum temperature for the process of spermatogenesis. If we will proceed to the secondary female sex organs or female genital tracts, we will start with the uterine tube or the fallopian tube. So the length of the uterine tube is about from 10 to 12 centimeter long. And as I'm showing here, it extends laterally from the side of the uterus as far as the ovary. And the fallopian tube is divided into the following four parts. If we will enumerate these parts from lateral to medial, we will start first with the infundibulum of the fallopian tube. The infundibulum of the fallopian tube lies close to the ovaries, and it is characteristically provided with finger-like processes. The rule of these projections or these finger-like processes is to pick up the ovary from the surface is to pick up the ovum from the surface of the ovary and to enter it inside the fallopian tube. Then the next part, again, if we will proceed from lateral to medial, the next part is the ampulla of the fallopian tube. And it is known as ampulla of the fallopian tube because it is the widest part of the fallopian. It is the widest part of the fallopian tube, and because of it is the widest part of the fallopian tube, this is why it is the site for fertilization. So this note is very important. So when the infundibulum, through its finger-like processes, pick up the ovum from the surface of the ovary, the ovum will enter to the fallopian tube and stay in the ampulla. Then after ejaculation, so the sperms will traverse all this length in order to reach to the ovum in the ampulla to be fertilized. This is the long journey that I described in the previous video that necessitate the presence of seminal fluid rich with nutrients in order to feed the sperm through its long period in the female genital tract. Then the next part of the fallopian tube, again, if we will proceed from lateral to medial, is the isthmus. And the isthmus is the narrowest part of the fallopian tube. The most medial part of the fallopian tube is the intramural part. Intramural part. Intra means inside. Mural means wall. This means that the fallopian tube has a distance in which it will run in the thickness of the wall of the fallopian of the uterus, and fallopian tube opens in the wall of the uterus at the junction between the fundus and the body of the uterus. So this point is very important, where fallopian tube opens in the uterus. Fallopian tube opens in the uterus at the junction between fundus and the body of the uterus. So this is another figure to show the ovary and how the infundibular end of the fallopian tube is provided with these finger-like processes, which are known as the fimbria. And these finger-like processes are important to pick up the ovum from the surface of the ovary during the process of ovulation. Then the next part of the female genital tract is the uterus. Uterus is an pelvic organ, and the uterus has an important relation with the urinary bladder that will be described later on in the pelvis. So the uterus is an pelvic organ. It lies between the urinary bladder anteriorly and the rectum posteriorly. The uterus is divided into a cavity. This is the cavity of the uterus, which is known as the uterine cavity. And it has a fundus. This fundus, which is a dome-like structure that expand above the level of the fallopian tube. Then this is the body, and we will explain the layers of the body later on. And finally, the cervix. The cervix, the lumen of the cervix, is divided into three parts. It has a communication inside with the uterine cavity, which is known as internal os. Os means opening. Internal os is the opening of the cervix into the uterine cavity. And cervical canal, and the last part of the cervix is the external os. External os, which is the opening of the cervix into the vagina, and through the external os, cervical canal, and internal os, this is the pathway of the sperms to get enter the uterine cavity. Then, as I explained before, then through these openings, either the right opening or the left opening, the sperms can enter the fallopian tube as far as to reach to the site of the ampulla for the fertilization of the ovum. Regarding the structure of the body histologically and anatomically, the wall of the body of the uterus is composed of three layers. These three layers from inside to outside, it is formed of endometrium, myometrium, and perimetrium. Metrium means uterus. So endo is the innermost layer of the wall of the uterus. Myometrium, which form the main thickness of the wall of the uterus and is formed of muscle. And finally, the outermost layer is the perimetrium. The importance of endometrium. Endometrium has another name, which is known as mucosa of the uterus, and it is formed of glandular epithelium. And this endometrium is the layer that will be sloughed out during the menstruation, as we will explain later. So here, this is a zoom for the wall of the uterus. So here, this layer indicates the perimetrium. Then the main thickness of the wall of the uterus is the myometrium, and the innermost layer of the wall of the uterus is the endometrium, and the endometrium is formed of glandular epithelium, and these are the examples for the openings in the wall of the uterus. These openings indicate the opening of the uterine gland. As we mentioned in the previous slides, endometrium is formed of glandular epithelium. So the ducts of these glands open on the lumen of the uterine cavity. And sure, these openings for the nourishment of the future zygote after the formation of the zygote. If we will take a brief about the histology of the uterus, because of the histology of the uterus is linked to the menstrual cycle. And to understand the menstrual cycle, we need to understand the histology of the uterus. And I will not go through the full histology of the uterus, but I will explain only the histology of the endometrium of the uterus. What we should know about the histology of the endometrium, as I'm showing here, is smooth and it is not folded. This note is very important. And as we described, it is in the form of simple columnar epithelium, glandular epithelium. This epithelium, which is simple columnar, is partially secretory and partially ciliated. This cilia is very important. This is to move any structure moving inside the uterine cavity towards the fundus. So these cilia beating towards the fundus of the uterus. And the secretory part, as we mentioned before, this is for the nutrient of the future zygote, inshallah. And as we mentioned here, that this epithelium is provided with these openings, and again, these openings for the nourishment for the uterine glands, which are essential for the nourishment of the future zygote. So here we will re-explain this figure again together with the menstrual cycle. What you should know is the endometrium is divided into two layers. A superficial functional layer, which is mentioned here as stratum functionalis, and deep layer, which is known as stratum basalis. Stratum means layer. So during the menstrual cycle, the part that will shed or sloughed out during the menstruation is only the stratum functionalis, while the stratum basalis will retain, through which we will restart again to build the mucosa of the uterus in order to be ready to be sloughed again during the next menstrual cycle. So this is why it is essential to explain the histology of the endometrium of the uterus. What is important, if you can compare between the stratum functionalis and the stratum basalis, the stratum functionalis contains the spiral arteries, which are coiled as showing here in this figure, and the blue color indicates the top of the uterine gland. When this superficial layer sloughed off or sloughed off or shed off during the menstruation, the basal layer will retain that contains the basal part or the bottom of the uterine gland and the straight arteries, through which the arteries will regrow again and the uterine gland regrow again in order to reform the endometrium of the new menstrual cycle, ready to receive the zygote. If zygote is formed, this is well and good. The endometrium by this structure will continue. If there is no pregnancy, the superficial layer will shed off again in the new menstrual cycle, leaving the basal part, and the process will repeated again in the new next cycle. So here I need from you to compare from this figure, and again this is the stratum functionalis, and this is the stratum basalis. In the menstrual cycle, yes, it will appear like this. Here, the stratum functionalis will shed off during menstruation and then reformed again in the new menstrual cycle. And finally, the vagina. Vagina, it has two walls, anterior wall and posterior wall. The anterior wall of the vagina is pierced by the cervix of the uterus. So by this relation between the cervix of the uterus and the vagina, four spaces will be created, which known as fornices. Fornices is plural, and the singular is fornix. So here we have, this is the anterior fornix and this is the posterior fornix. The posterior fornix is the deepest fornices, and the posterior fornix is the site for the ejaculation and to collect the seminal fluid. And here these are the two lateral fornices that present between the lateral side of the cervix and the vagina. That's all for our video today. Thank you for your attendance. See you in the next video. Goodbye and good luck.